Agenda with Michael Knight on News Radio 560 KPQ and KPQ.com.
At 11 minutes past 1 o'clock, let's meet our special guest. He's Don Meseck, state labor economist, and the man that we call our totally secret investigator into who's got a job and who doesn't. Don has the equipment and the means to collect numbers that no one else in the state has, and he comes by periodically to give us the news. And our news today is a little bit of good news, which usually you bring, Don, but a little bit of bad news or cautionary news, too.
Cautionary news. I think you hit the nail right on the head, Mike.
So should we start with the good?
Well, maybe cautionary. I always try to start with the bad news first.
Well, you're in charge. You're the job's executive, Don.
Well, I think the cautionary news, the one thing, Mike, is our agency calculates the employment figures and the unemployment rates, and our unemployment rate has started to climb in the Wenatchee MSA. It rose from 5.1 to 5.3% between the Aprils of 2017 and 18. It stabilized last month between the Marches of 17 and 18, and I think we all knew it was going to happen. We're having historically low unemployment rates. That's the cautionary news, the bad news. The good news is that the 5.3% reading is still a historically low reading for the month of April. In fact, I went back and looked through our data. The last time we had an April reading of 5%, and that range was April 2008, was 5.9. So even though the rate started to climb, it's still it's still in the historically low rates.
For so many months, you give your report, and we were setting new records month after month after month after month.
It can drop, and sooner or later it has to stabilize or rise. And the short story, it started to climb again, but it's not time to push the panic button yet.
So the numbers are changing, but the actual strength of the market is still secure.
Yes, yeah, and I think we have to keep it in perspective too, Mike. Last year our unemployment rate here was in calendar year 2017 was the lowest rate we had in recorded history. We had a 5.1% unemployment rate in Chelan Douglas counties in calendar year 2017, and that was the lowest rate, annual average rate we've had since we started to compile electronic data back in 1990. So when you get rates that low, sooner or later there's only one way to go, and that's back up.
And you've been predicting this actually for a couple of months, saying, I don't know how much longer this can go on.
Well, I was thinking sooner or later, it probably has to go up, and that's really what's happening now.
And what changes took place in the marketplace to change those numbers?
Well, that's a good question. I think if you look at non-farm growth, we're still doing relatively good. In fact, that's the good news. Our non-farm growth has been rising. The rate's been rising since about January of 2017. In the first 2 quarters of last year, non-farm here in the Wenatchee MSA grew about 1%. In the last 2 quarters, it grew roughly 2%. As we come into the first 4 months of 2018, the non-farm growth rate's about 3%. In fact, even hit 4% 1 month. So what's really been causing the rate to rise is the fact that the labor force has been stabilizing, but the number of unemployed has started to creep up. We have 72 more residents out of work in April 2018 than we had in April 2017.
And those 72 people live in the MSA?
Yes.
The metropolitan statistical area.
Remember, these are the labor force is based on place of residence, regardless where people work. So we have 348 fewer residents in the labor force this April than in April 2017. And we have 72 more residents out of work. So consequently, the rate went from 5.1 up to 5.3% during that time frame between the Aprils of 17 and 18.
So we're getting down to the percentage points and realizing that the numbers that we're talking about are really affecting like 300 people or 72 people, depending on the category.
And, considering if we look at the raw data, Mike, we had 62,657 residents in our labor force April 2017. So we keep that figure in mind, 62,657. We had only 62,309 residents this April. So it's not a catastrophic drop. It's a 0.6% downturn, 348 fewer residents. It's never good news when the unemployment rate starts to rise. Don't get me wrong. I think we all look for declining rates. But my point is still that a 5% reading for Chelan Douglas counties in the month of April is still historically low.
Pretty strong.
Yes.
Now, when these people lose their jobs over at Don Meseck Industries, when someone's let go, do you tell the state? Do you say we cut our workforce by 5 people this year or this month?
Yes, and there's actually, I think, at least 2 ways we capture the data. One is claims. Of course, our agency is responsible when people file unemployment claims. We capture all those data. The other is a survey of households that's conducted nationally in every county in the nation, and we have a sample here in Chelan County and in Douglas County. So say if a person doesn't file a claim, that household survey is a way of estimating the number of unemployed in Chelan County and in Douglas County. It's the federal household survey.
And how often is that?
Every month.
Really?
Every month. So it's one of the things that people often think, well, the unemployment rate is just based on claims. Well, no, it's a little bit more than that. There's several other pieces of data that we incorporate into calculating our.
Well, there are some people who lose their job and they're not qualified for unemployment, so they never make a claim.
If they're unemployed, but they're still ready, willing, and able to work, they're counted as unemployed. Right. Not necessarily if they're drawing benefits. That's a really good point.
While these numbers are changing by percentage points, the strength of the market, the place that we turn to find out where these jobs came from in the first place, is still there, and the market leaders are still the same, aren't they?
It is. You know, when I look at our economy, there is still more good news than bad. And I think the big thing is when I look at non-farm growth rates, which is basically that's the jobs report, whether it's county, state, or national. Every month we hear the jobs report is out.
Right.
That's primarily looking at non-farm growth, and it's been good. It's been good here. Historically, I went back and looked all the way back to January of last year in terms of monthly changes. And like I say, in the first 2 quarters of last year, our economy was growing about a 1% clip. And it kind of gradually accelerated to about 2% in the last 2 quarters of last year. And the first 4 months of this year, we're up to 3%. And so much so that in April, between the Aprils of 2017 and 18, Mike, we gained about 1,500 jobs here in the MSA in the 2-county area. That's a 3.4% growth rate. So, and that's more robust than the state's growth rate. Good. It's good news.
The state, we would probably think we have a robust economy in the state of Washington, but the growth rates are still less than what we're experiencing here in our counties.
Yes. Historically, though.
I mean, I don't know if Amazon and Microsoft are hiring a lot of people these days. Maybe they are.
You do bring up an interesting point, and that's something I should discuss very briefly. When we looked at the state retail trade trends, employment, there is some growth in retail, but there's one component. Remember when we talk retail, we're looking at auto dealerships, food stores, hardware stores, electronic stores, and a category we term other retail. The short story, most of the growth in retail statewide is in this category called other retail trade. Not so much in the brick and mortar stores. It's in the other category, and that's primarily Internet shopping.
So that's still considered retail, even though you're
yes.
shopping in without the help
yes.
of without an actual edifice in which to buy the product.
Exactly. And if I look at the state data every month, and I've noticed that that's one of the, and this is not just a Don Meseck discovery, that's kind of based on our state numbers, that's where the real growth has been in retail, in the Internet. It's called, again, other retail trade employment, but it's primarily this Internet shopping. Firms engaged in Internet exchange of goods.
We always talk about these numbers as non-farm.
Correct.
Because the farm numbers come in a very different way, a completely different way.
Yeah, they come in later.
And they come in later. And
Yes.
if I work for stem growers, am I considered farm labor, or have I got a real job? Do I have to be a day worker in the fields to be a farm laborer?
Well, it's a good question. The jobs, the companies are classified according to a system called NAICS, North American Industry Classification Code. There's a NAICS code, which is called 11, NAICS Code 11, which is agriculture. And then there's, of course, 3-digit NAICS code levels: crop production, animal production, agriculture, forestry, and fishing support. But the short story on it, jobs on the farm or in the orchard would be, or if a person has a ranch, those jobs would be classified under agriculture. However, many jobs that are related to agriculture, Mike, are also, I put it this way, some jobs, many jobs here in the two-county area that are related to agriculture are termed or categorized under non-farm. Specifically, food manufacturing. Right? Those jobs are directly related to agriculture, but all those jobs are categorized under the non-farm category, under actually manufacturing. Another category is wholesale trade, the wholesale trade of non-durable goods, agricultural, fresh fruit packing houses. All those jobs are under the non-farm category. Transportation, trucking is another big category where many trucking jobs here in the two-county area are directly related to agriculture.
So non-farm jobs, despite the fact that we don't measure them very often, really don't have the impact that the rest of the other categories that have to be properly read to understand the impact of agriculture on our area.
Precisely. If we were to take a lot of those non-farm jobs directly dependent on ag, food manufacturing, wholesale trade, trucking, those firms are directly dependent on agriculture, and throw those jobs, those employment and wages, into agriculture, we'd find that the impact of ag is extremely great here in the two-county area, not only in Chelan, Douglas counties, but in Yakima County, Grant County, Adams, Okanagan, and so on. Agriculture
so it takes a trained eye to read the real impact of agriculture on an area.
It does. And a lot of it's just terminology, taxonomy, how we classify businesses.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about some good news.
Yes, sir.
Hate to leave anybody with the feeling that the economy is bottoming out and we're all in trouble, because we're just talking about percentage points. But at the same time, the leaders that gave us the low figures for so many months in a row are still the same, right?
They are.
For the most part.
There's probably 4 industries that I'd highlight that are faring very well this April compared to April 2017. The leader of the pack is health services.
Oh, really?
Yes, we're up 5.
Construction.
What, pardon me?
It passed construction.
It passed construction, and not in terms of growth rates, but in terms of total number of jobs added. Remember, health services is a large category. We went from about 7,200 jobs to 7,700 jobs between the Aprils of 17 and 18. So that's 500 new construction jobs, a 6.9% growth rate. That's the leader of the pack right now in the two-county area. There's 3 other industries, Mike, that each netted 300 new jobs in the Wenatchee MSA over the year, from April 17 to April 18. Construction netted 300, and that's what you mentioned earlier. That's a terrific growth rate, 11.5% growth rate in construction. The other is leisure and hospitality.
Oh, yes.
And the other is local government. So those 3 are each industries or organizations which added 300 new jobs over the year.
And we're talking about percentage of the civilian labor force, which you also measure. So we can take a look at both our counties and say we know that there are about 63,000 people working. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, actually the non-farm jobs, there's kind of a difference in those 2 numbers. And you bring up a really good point. The labor force numbers, from which the unemployment rate's calculated, is based on place of residence, where people live. The non-farm jobs are smaller in number, and here we're just counting jobs in Chelan and Douglas counties. So those are what we call place of work numbers. So depending on the commuting in each county, they don't always run in a perfect inverse relationship. That is, normally one would say in a perfect environment, if all was self-contained, that as the labor force grows, as the number of unemployed grows, well, then the non-farm employment should decline. But it doesn't work perfectly that way because of commuting and also because of agricultural jobs are estimated indirectly in the labor force numbers. So it's not
if you live here and work in the Tri-Cities, we count your job here.
And you're laid off, your claim would ping, so to speak,
right,
would
ping.
be registered in Chelan, Douglas counties. So that's a real good point. And, what always sticks in my mind is several years ago in Kittitas County, we had this situation where it's just as you say. We had, this is about the time the dot-coms were laying off up in Seattle. Remember, in Kittitas County, many people from Roslyn, Clay Elum commute into Seattle to work or into Bellevue. They were getting laid off. Unemployment was rising in Kittitas County. Simultaneously, construction was booming. There was residential construction growth. There was institutional construction growth. They were building the CERC, the Student Union Building at CWU, and so on. So non-farm employment was rising. Well, what am I saying? Basically, we saw non-farm employment grow, and we saw the unemployment rate rise also. And it ties into that question you had.
Where is that job?
How can the unemployment rate be rising when employment's also rising? It's because there's not that perfect inverse relationship between labor force and non-farm employment. But and
in this environment, you can work on the west side and live in a lot of different places.
Yes, you can be living here working seafood processing. You can be living here and perhaps working as a doctor or a fireman up in Mount Vernon, And there is a fair number that you can be teleworking.
Oh, yeah. I wish I were. We could be at home right now, Don.
That's right. I could be talking to you over the phone.
There you go.
Although I'd much rather be in here talking with you, Mike.
Well, we'd invite you over to the house.
That's right. A cup of coffee.
Sure. Well, let's talk about the leading category that we're dealing with. It's been a strong indicator for months and months and months, and that's health services. And is it growing or the other shrinking?
Well, it is growing. Health services has been a growth industry here. I think what's driving it? The population's getting older. You require more health services. There's retirees moving into the area, need health services. I think another thing, Wenatchee is becoming somewhat of a hub throughout north central Washington for health services. Many functions, I think, are done here now that used to be done in Seattle. There's still a lot of people that have health issues, I'm sure, who are going back to Seattle or King County.
For specialists.
Yeah, for specialists. But I think the demographics are driving it, more people retiring here, and the fact that the services are expanding as well here in this Wenatchee and maybe also in Douglas County, but especially in the Chelan County area.
And I think that I'm just guessing about this because I'm only wagering hazarding a guess, as they say. But it's a healthy population in terms of the way they like to use the outdoors. There's skiers, there's skateboarders, there's hikers and bikers and all that stuff.
Yes.
It's not that they get hurt more often, but they're concerned about their health. And they go to the doctor to get fixed.
That could be too.
Fix this.
Yeah. Perhaps they have better health insurance coverage or take advantage of it. Also, I know from having a daughter and son-in-law who do biking and all that stuff, and they do get racked up once in a while, too. So
every once in a while you meet the earth. You meet the earth on the earth's terms.
Yes. Or being fairly athletic myself, especially when I was young, with shoulder surgeries, knee surgeries, I also patronized those businesses.
Don't get a shoulder surgery if you can possibly avoid it.
I try to avoid it.
It's my advice to everyone. You say, what do you know? All I know that I've learned in life is don't get your shoulder worked on unless you
stay away from the doctor's office.
But the funny thing about shoulders is you don't have much choice.
No.
If you don't get it fixed, it's not going to work.
No.
It's not like you have an option there.
Nope, that's true.
Well, Don, let's summarize what we've learned for the audience that just tuned in. What are the new numbers are a little bit daunting, but at the same time, it's not bad news. It's just cautionary news.
Mike, you hit the note right on the head. You hit the nail right on the head, I guess, is the bad news. Unemployment rate starting to creep upwards, but it's not time to push the panic button. The unemployment rates in the 5% range here in Wenatchee MSA are still historically low. The good news is our non-farm growth is moving in the right direction. If our estimates are true, we're seeing a slow and steady upturn in non-farm growth rates here in the two-county area since January of last year, continuing right up through April 2018. So, and what's driving it? Health services, construction, leisure and hospitality, and local government.
When one of your county clients says, Don, we're hitting the panic button. This thing's gone far enough. What can the county do? What good does the panic button do? What can the county do about its unemployment?
It's one of those things. The only thing we can do really is advise. As intelligence officers, as you say, we can make people aware of the data. That's the whole mission of our agency, Mike, is to provide labor market information to decision makers, whether it's business or government. And everybody takes that information and uses it as they see fit.
Don Meseck is our state labor economist, also our labor intelligence officer, for which we can't talk about. That's all you need to know. It's totally top secret.
It's so secret, even we don't know what's going on.
Don has no idea what